Hello, everybody. Hello. So my name is Ben Bamsey, and I am the senior producer for CNN Newsroom Los Angeles. Most importantly, I'm a storyteller. And this story is so important, impactful, and powerful to me. I know that a lot of it is very sad, and it's probably going to get a little sadder as I go through some clips here today. But I really want you to soak all this in and realize that the power of one matters. You can make a difference. It is my mission to make a difference in this cause. And I hope we'll all do the same thing. The story of the Rohingya is the reason that I'm in this business. Not because I like sadness, but because I believe that this institution, journalism, has the power to change. It starts with our mission statement of understanding what news truly is. News, as its definition, is an event, trend, or sentiment that people care about or should care about. I want to thank my professor from Iowa, Steve Bloom, for that one. It stuck with me, it's resonated. I'll say it again. News is an event, trend, or sentiment that people care about or should care about. The Rohingya crisis checks all of those boxes. Ethnic cleansing with 700,000 refugees fleeing for their lives over the last 6 months. Pain and agony for their entire community. And by just their community, I mean the world community. We are all invested in this. We all should care. It should matter. Our job is to hold the powerful accountable. Gold chair sitting crooks need to know that they are on the hot seat. My job is not to tell stories about pastors who give great sermons and get people to the cause. My job is to hold pastors who do bad things accountable. Bad actors need to pay for their crimes. We're here to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comforted. So if you're at home and you look out and you see a nice ocean view, feel some affliction for the Rohingya people. Take up the cause, do something, make a difference. There's a picture I want to show you, and it's my screensaver at work. And there it is. This was taken a month ago. Rohingya refugees who made it into Bangladesh, 3 children, tears streaming from their face. I have 2 daughters, a 6-year-old and a 2-year-old. And that breaks my heart. It's a reminder why I do my job, when I see it on my computer every day when I walk into work. So how did I become so profoundly affected by the Rohingya? New York Times Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist Jeffrey Gettleman was on our show. This was in September, shortly after the incident in August. He had visited the camps in Bangladesh, and he told us this story.
You recently made a reporting trip to Bangladesh where you spent time interviewing some of the Rohingya refugees who fled the violence in Myanmar. You met a young woman called Rajuma. Can you share with our viewers what she told you about what had happened to her?
Yes, I can, and this is pretty upsetting. It was one of the more horrendous interviews I've ever done in my career. Rajuma was a woman who saw government soldiers coming into her village and burning down houses. She was hiding in her house with her family and was surrounded by these troops that were just looting and burning all around her. When she tried to run away, she was quickly captured. And she told the story of how troops then marched her down to the riverbank in her village, separated the men from the women, and then methodically raped all the women and killed just about all the men. But the worst thing she told me, which was just like almost too much for me to even bear absorbing, let alone for her to have to endure it, was she had a small baby in her arms, and she said that these soldiers grabbed her baby son and threw him into a fire right in front of her, and he was screaming her name as he burned to death.
You can't hear that story and not act. We chose to act. My partner, Aisha Sasay, who is the anchor for my show, She and I talked right after the show, and we said we will not let this rest. So for months, every week, we have championed the cause of the Rohingya. We reach 370 million homes worldwide each and every day. And I want to use that platform to tell this story. So how did we get here? Well, the Rohingya are a minority Muslim population in a predominantly Buddhist country. They have been persecuted for decades, as our guy on the phone was saying. They've had severely restricted citizenship, movement, freedom, access to education and jobs is limited, if not impossible. The experts we've talked to at CNN say the Buddhist majority has long wanted them out of the country, calling them illegal immigrants and much worse. In August of 2017, it's undeniable that an insurgent group of Muslims did attack a Myanmar police outpost in northern Rakhine State. After that, the military says it was retaliating, but human rights groups say thousands of innocent civilians were slaughtered, babies stabbed, women gang raped, villages burned. And that is the definition of ethnic cleansing.
This is ethnic cleansing. There is absolutely no doubt of that. But what we have now documented is that there are 11 acts listed in the Rome Statute of the International Criminal Court, when committed in these sort of circumstances, rise to the level of crimes against humanity. And consistently, in the interviews that we have done with witnesses, with survivors, 6 of those has continually been coming up: rape, sexual violence, assault, persecution, forced displacement, and even the denial of basic services like food. I mean, access to food is now one of the push factors which has seen tens of thousands of Rohingya fleeing across the border in most recent days.
We uncovered grave crimes against the Rohingya population. We're talking about mass killing, massacres. We were documenting cases in which soldiers slit throats, threw infant children into fires. In some cases, entire groups of residents of Rohingya villages were corralled, told that they would be safe, told not to flee, and then they were massacred. And in the process, huge numbers of refugees have, of course, been pouring across the border into Bangladesh.
The situation of suffering is, for me, is something that I didn't have the experience before. The level of suffering, of desperation is really the highest that I ever seen in my humanitarian experience. You have to imagine a town of 600,000 people built up in only a few weeks, but there is no electricity, no water, no facilities. The situation is something really unbelievable.
They've told us of extreme forms of violence, and the result is that we're seeing many families having been separated with missing family members, young children extremely traumatized and in need of immediate psychosocial support. Women and young women, including children, are heading households at the moment and needing to fend for themselves.
And we found that 1 in 4 of the children are actually malnourished. And that is a staggering high number. Usually in an emergency, we speak of an emergency when it's 15%, and here it's 25%. So you can imagine the hardship they are going to right now. And it's really a potential disaster for outbreaks of diseases as well. And children who are malnourished and not treated, they may very well die.
Rajiv talked about evidence. The United Nations, NGOs, boots on the ground, evidence. So where is the outrage to all of this? Why has the international community been so slow to react? It took the United States 3 months to get on board to even call it ethnic cleansing. All talk, no action. In November, the Pope met with de facto leader Aung San Suu Kyi. And he struggled with words, wasn't even able to utter the word Rohingya on Myanmar soil. For good reason, many would argue because of the conflict it could have caused had he have done so. But if you can't even say the word Rohingya, what does that tell you? Without accountability, the killings continue.
The gamble was for the Pope to mention the Rohingyas in a public speech in front of Aung San Suu Kyi and government leaders and risk shutting down the dialogue that he has come here to establish. So that was likely the reason that the Pope sort of went soft on that in the public limelight.
The Rohingya is a term that's adopted by the Rohingya community itself. They have a right to self-identify, they have a right to nationality, and the Myanmar government and military has been disavowing that right to self-identify by calling them Bengali interlopers and foreigners that should return to where they come from.
There are horrific conditions that still are there in northern Rakhine State. There's a system that is entrenched of discrimination and segregation that needs to be uprooted. If the military is not held accountable, what's stopping them from carrying out these abuses again? Are we going to reward ethnic cleansing? Is the world going to let this pass?
I'm very concerned about the Rohingya. I'm very angry that the response internationally has been lacking. I'm very concerned about the stories of the 10-year-old girls who are being raped, and there's a lot of discussion. There's maybe too much discussion and very little action, and we see this is all too often the case these days.
This satellite imagery does just add to the weight of evidence that we have that this campaign of ethnic cleansing has not completed, it's not finished. And unfortunately, the international community's lukewarm statements haven't done the trick. Myanmar authorities are not feeling the pressure. They don't see a need to change their ways. And in fact, they're becoming more obstructionist by the day.
That's right. Myanmar has closed up shop. There's no monitoring groups, no aid groups, no journalists allowed in. In fact, 2 Reuters journalists who were there, they were jailed in December after following up on a tip of some mass graves. When they met with a police officer, it was kind of an ambush situation, and they were arrested on the spot. And they now face up to 14 years in jail, charged with violating the Antiquated Officials Secrets Act, whatever that is. Many hold Aung San Suu Kyi accountable. Her government shut out the UN Special Rapporteur. Others, of course, know that the Myanmar military and their power over the people, which has long gone on, is certainly the most to blame. With access denied, however, hope and change in Myanmar is fading too.
Well, we had very high expectations because the National League for Democracy was the victim of these kinds of laws. Over half of their members of parliament were political prisoners at one point. And Aung San Suu Kyi herself, the leader of the party and the de facto leader of the civilian government, was both a prisoner and under house arrest for most of the past 20 years. And they made commitments that they would end these practices. And instead, what we're seeing is that not only are the military having people arrested and setting up journalists like the Reuters journalists, but members of the National League for Democracy, the ruling party themselves, are filing cases. This is just the most prominent case, but there have been dozens of cases filed since Aung San Suu Kyi came to power against journalists, against peaceful protesters, and they're using some of the harshest laws in the country. This Official Secrets Act was put in place by the British, but it was used by the Burmese military to basically make the disclosure of any government information a crime. And we didn't expect this. We thought that Aung San Suu Kyi would lead a revolution of freedom and openness.
She has been put on, falsely, in my view, on pedestal in the league with Martin Luther King Jr., Mahatma Gandhi, and Mandela. People around the world are completely incredulous that she is showing her true color. And she is not just simply looking the other way when the military is conducting all these genocidal campaigns against Rohingya. She is proactively covering up and dismissing all kinds of credible allegations coming even from the United Nations that Burma is committing, mass atrocities.
The military has operated with complete impunity for a long time in Myanmar. And that has manifested itself during this current crisis in terms of its ruthless campaign against the Rohingya, being met with no real action, no real consequences, both inside and outside of Myanmar. There have been condemnations, statements of concern from countries around the world, but no real consequences to date. And that's left the Myanmar military to continue squeezing the Rohingya population, now through starvation and through this really nasty theft at checkpoints. So we need to see the statements that are coming from countries around the world turn to action. We need to see real consequences. We need to see an arms embargo on Myanmar. And we need to see targeted financial sanctions against the senior officials in the military who have led this campaign for months.
The fact that State Councilor Aung San Suu Kyi is denying still to this day, denying UN fact-finders access to Northern Rakhine. There are some aid groups, but they have very limited access. So there's a tremendous fear that we haven't seen the worst of the violence and the killings.
And that's why they flee. In this latest campaign of ethnic cleansing, nearly 700,000 have been forced into Bangladeshi camps. And for them, life is all about survival. At those camps, it's crowded, it's dirty, dank. Refugees are left to deal with physical injuries, mental health trauma, life without families lost. Women have been gang raped. The survivors are now terrified. They're haunted if and when they can sleep. And now monsoon season is coming.
I mean, the needs are much bigger than we alone can provide. We've had a massive measles outbreak. We're in the middle of a diphtheria outbreak. The survivors of sexual violence are increasing in numbers as women know what the information is and are coming forward. So the needs are really huge. There's a need to dig wells and set up latrines. I mean, we're really talking about a muddy, dirty living condition, and you know, it must have been completely horrible and terrifying and nightmarish to leave Myanmar, and if this is the hope that they're arriving at, are these conditions in the camps.
Children are telling Save the Children that they are incredibly cold at night. You might not think that there's actually winter in Bangladesh, but it can actually get quite chilly. So they are telling us that when they are sleeping, they are shaking. When they are waking up in the morning, they have to go fetch water. They have to go and collect wood, that they cannot wake up, that they cannot move, that they want to stay closer to their parents because it's just so cold. And you might not think it's actually that cold, but it is, as you already said it, but I want people to imagine that you're sleeping in a forest, in a structure, very simple structure made out of bamboo and covered with plastic, and that the only thing that you have between your body and the humid soil is plastic again.
People, women in particular, are still very worried about their safety. They talk about the fear of sexual violence. The camps are dark and not lit at night, so basically they're afraid to go out. We've heard about kidnappings, and men also say they're staying awake at night because they're worried their children will be kidnapped.
The women and girls that I met and the organizations that I met during my visit to numerous camps in Bangladesh, they're traumatized. You know, they left with little more than the clothes on their backs. They have suffered brutality and indignity and disenfranchisement for generations. So this is not new. This has been going on for a very long time. But the escalation, the nature, the pace, the scale of the brutality since August is unprecedented. And so, of course, they're dealing with the trauma of that, and of course, also with the physical health problems that come with that.
What next? Well, on January 16th, Bangladesh and Myanmar agreed to repatriate the Rohingya. But nothing has changed back home. They have no rights, their homes have been burned, and they're afraid if they go back, they'll be killed.
The voice of the refugees need to be central to any decision on returns. The second thing that I would emphasize is any return needs to occur in conditions that are safe, that are voluntary, and ultimately that are sustainable. Now, Aisha, when we've spoken with the refugees here in Bangladesh, these 655,000 refugees who've crossed the border since 25 August, they have essentially set forth three preconditions from their perspective to return. The first is that the government of Myanmar needs to address the issue of citizenship and legal status. The second is that they need to be able to return in conditions of safety. It's got to be a safe place to go back to. And the third is there need to be reconstruction efforts to ensure that they're able to enjoy their basic rights when they do go back home.
I met two young women just yesterday who told me a terrible rape. One also had their 7-year-old boy's throat cut in front of them. I mean, nearly every girl and woman has been raped. So unless we get an improved situation on the ground, people can't go home from Bangladesh. So I understand his frustration. I think we're all frustrated and deeply shocked by what we're seeing and hearing from these refugees.
I mean, Justin, you said that until the safety and well-being of any child returning to Myanmar can be guaranteed, talk of repatriation is premature. What kind of guarantees are you seeking?
Well, firstly, we need humanitarian access. We're on the ground in Rakhine State, but we can't go to the very north easily. And even if we're in some of the towns in the north, we can't go out to the villages where much of this violence has happened. Secondly, we need not to return people to camps like these open prisons where people are controlled, where they don't really have any freedom. They need to go back to their villages. They need some guarantees of security from the military. We also need to make sure we invest a lot. I mean, the villages have been burnt down. People have no schools to are hungry and malnourished by the time they get into Bangladesh. So we're going to need to provide aid when they go back to Myanmar. I mean, I talk to lots of children and their families here in Bangladesh, and all of them want to go home, but they all believe it's premature. I mean, some of them had even been speaking to relatives, one and aunt, in Rakhine, and we know from reports from our own staff, and the violence is continuing. People are still coming across the border, so we can't push people back into that level of violence.
I began with a story, and I'll end with a story. It's another one that's going to tear your heart out. But it's important because this is another news story. This happened just last month, and it tugs at my soul when I hear stories like this. This is a friend of mine, Thomas Naibo, who is a filmmaker, journalist, working with UNICEF on this project. He's in Bangladesh. Recently talked to a mother, and this is mother's story.
Do they feel that the world has failed them? Do they feel like the world has forgotten about them? I wonder as you speak to them what their sense is, if they even have the bandwidth to think about the wider world after everything they've been through.
I want to share with you one of the most powerful stories, one of the most powerful conversations I've had covering this crisis. I was with a group of women at a UNICEF space. A lot of them had been attacked, a lot of them had been raped, and there was a woman, she was wearing a veil, and after she became comfortable with me, she removed the veil, and she had dark circles under her eyes, blood vessels burst in her eyes, and she said, I want to tell you my story. And I explained to her that if I share her photo, the world can see this. And repeatedly, she told me, the world needs to know what happened. She was fleeing with her 4 children. Soldiers grabbed her 4-year-old boy, threw him in the air, stabbed him with machetes until he died. She ran to them despondent, crying. She said, just kill me, kill me. They beat her with the butts of her rifles. This was just 2 months ago. And the horseshoe-shaped bruises are still beneath her eyes. She still can't see properly. Her eyes are so red from the burst blood vessels. And she talked about being beaten. And before she lost consciousness, 4 or 5 soldiers were gang raping her. And she said the world needs to hear about this so it doesn't happen again.
Ethnic cleansing in Myanmar. It's happening. Thank you for caring, for being here. We all can make a difference. The power of one. Rajiv, you're my brother. You're my brother. Activism is a word, it's a strong word, it's an important word. Be an activist. How can you make a difference? Get on social media, use the word Rohingya. Link to an article, link to a story. Tell your friends. Talk to your congresspeople. Write letters. Change needs to happen. It's too important. The Rohingya story matters. Thank you.